Okay, go.
I'm going to take my time. I'm calling the meeting to order. Today is Friday, November 9th, and the time is 10:36 a.m., 10:37 a.m. We have a quorum present. All board members, with the exception of Lance Losi, are present and present in the room. The meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting is posted as required by law. Okay, so we're going right into the presentation of the, no, what are we doing?
We're going to go into charter first, right? You're right, presentation of charter first, annual financial management. Okay, Corey?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
As you all probably saw in your Dropbox, you had two documents, one for Premier High Schools, one for Texas College Preparatory Academy, related to our financial management performance ratings, known as Charter First. These ratings were for the 2017-18 financial accountability ratings, but they cover the fiscal year 2016-17. So just make note of that. The highlight is we got superior on both. For TCPA, our score was 100. For Premier High School, our score was 96. The only thing that kind of dinged us on that one was the one of the ratios. It was between 1.5 and 2.0, and there's just different levels of 6 is still good. It just wasn't quite to 2 to 1 ratio, which would have been just full 10 points. Still superior. Everything really looks good. Also behind there, you'll see the reference to the previous year, just for comparison purposes. But I just want to bring that to your attention today. Any questions on that?
This is changing at least every other year. I would say it's changing every year, but there's probably a year it's not changed. But it seems like it's changing every other year. So, and it's going to change again. It is a moving target. So when you have things like, we're very proud of the superior, the 100 on TCPA. On the Premier, we're just as proud with the 96. As Corey mentioned, you have some of these items that are not legally required in law of charter schools, but by the fact they're putting it in Charter First, they're almost making it a legal issue, right? They're sticking it in there, saying you're going to be held accountable. It's like administrative cost ratio. There's no education code that says a charter school has to meet this administrative cost ratio. But they've decided it's a best practice, and they've put it in the report, and then they've taken it out, and they put it back in. So it's just like academics we'll talk about in a few minutes. It is a moving target. So I think we've done an amazing job as an organization. Continue to hit these higher numbers, continue to get superior, and I commend our finance team for the work they do.
Thank you.
So, Sarah, is there anything else required by law on the presentation?
No.
That's really it, right?
Yes, that is.
All right. Chris, anything else you can think of?
Sure.
All right. So, do you have any questions? Really just that was it. You've got the documents. It's required by law. We have a presentation. So,
Got it. Got it. They'll present it too.
all right.
Any public comments?
We do not have anybody here from the public. Yeah, with the code.
All right. Go to the executive report, or we're going to consent item?
You mind if we just skip to separate item 1 and get the audit
Okay, moving.
moving? So you don't have to sit here for 30 minutes?
Sure. I think you want to do the consent items budget.
Yes, let's do consent items first, because we do have a budget item on here that has to be approved before the audit. Thank you, Corey. So if we can pause on the executive report, do the consent items, and then do separate item number 1.
Is there anything you want to call out in consent items? That,
these are all standard items that you will see on typical board meetings. You'll also see a couple of these that occur in the late fall, like the district improvement plan. You will always see district contracts on here. You'll see payment of bills. You have requested, as board members, you've requested we not give you all payment of bills, all however many hundreds. We have limited 50,000 and up, so you don't feel like you have to look through everything, right? So if you ever want to see them, ask for them. They are posted on the website as well after a few months. But right now you're starting to see 50,000, so it makes it a lot easier to look.
Can you remind me what Deja Brew is?
The new coffee shop that we want to go to sometime. It's at the entrepreneurship school, so it's at Lakeway, just opened. Great
It's not a
coffee.
brewery?
It's after hours. It's just coffee. So,
Sorry, Chris.
good question.
What's the rationale for the budget amendments?
The 2017-18 and the 2019. So the 17-18 is related to the audit itself. It's just a few little cleanups that you will actually see in the audit. As far as the individual 18-19 current year, there is a requirement in law about the board approving the budget by function. So you will see anytime there is an item where we feel like we're going to exceed it. Is there a percentage we can't exceed it? Is it like 5% or 10% or something? Y'all know?
I don't think it's percentage.
There's something related to the original or something, Jay? Anyway, so basically, just by law, you can't exceed your budget.
Understood.
So you're gonna see minor things. You're gonna see a big one on 18-19 because of virtual. Because we've moved from K-12 to vendor to doing it internal. So those numbers, the revenue's
gone down
significantly, and then you'd see the expense.
And how often are budget amendments typically done?
Probably, we usually bring some at each board meetings.
Quarterly, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
At least quarterly, not every other month of the board.
Thank you.
Is that unusual for you in your business?
Well, even in my business, I mean, for us, we set up an annual budget, and we call them forecasts, which do change. But sometimes the budgeting terminology, depending on the business unit and how you manage.
That's what we call it, forecasting too.
Forecasting. So that's why I was just trying to,
We do a 9-quarter roll.
understood.
So we are asking that the board approve consent items 1 through 13.
Okay, do I hear a motion to approve consent items 1 through 13?
Motion to approve consent items 1 through 13.
Thank you. I'll second that motion. Any objection? Consent items under E of the agenda 1 through 13 passes unanimously. All right, now we're moving on to the budget. Not the budget, the audit, sorry.
Okay, Corey?
Yes,
Turn
sir.
it over to you.
Got it. Hopefully you all had a chance to look at the Dropbox and saw the final audit report provided for our auditors. Just want to pause a moment and just first want to introduce, for those of you who don't know, you probably all do know, but I do this for my own benefit. This is Kirk Evans, our partner with his audit firm that does our audit every year. We work with him closely throughout the year, not just once a year. Try to keep that an ongoing relationship just for guidance purposes, nothing else. But want to thank him for being here. He's here also for any questions you may have about what he does as we go through this for the next few minutes. So I just want to stop and thank him for being here. As far as the report goes, I just want to hit a few highlights. Of course, we're not going to go through all 51 pages, right? Hopefully you have a chance to look at it. If you have some questions, we'll talk through them. But I just want to hit a few high spots to begin with. Number one is going through our balance sheet, our assets. We'll talk about cash. One of the things we like to keep an eye on around here is our days of cash on hand. You'll see our cash and cash equivalents were just south of $58 million. That equates to 136 days of cash on hand. That's pretty standard where we like to easily be over 100 days. The state's kind of threshold is I think 90 days. We like to be over 100. No reason for it. Number one. Number two, our change in net assets. which is basically our net surplus for the year, was just shy of $21 million. It's $20,947,574. I do want to make note that if you'll remember, we changed our fiscal year to June 30th from August 31st. So this basically, in essence, represents 12 months of revenue and 10 months of expenses. So for this 1 year, I mean, it's a good number. We like it, but it's a little bit of an outlier. But I want to make sure you noted that when you saw that number. One of the things you're probably familiar with that was a supplement to this report was the 5-year rolling schedule that you got in the Dropbox. It's called the Consolidated Statement of Financial Position.
I think we have a printout.
I think, yeah, each one of you should have that in your place. This is just every year we have to look back 5 years to kind of see how things are rolled forward. One thing we did add this year was a column on the far right. Because this was an abbreviated year with 12 months of revenues and 10 months of expenses, we just wanted to give kind of an estimate of what we would have kind of looked like if we had a whole 12 months worth of expenses in there. We tried to be conservative on it, just to be careful. And you can see that the change in net assets would have been over $10 million still. So we just wanted to kind of give that to you as an estimate of what we thought it would have been close to if it would have been 12 months worth of expenses. So if you got a chance to look at that, we just want to give you all that for, this won't be on there going forward because we'll have 12 months of expenses and 12 months of revenue. Are there any questions as you went through this report that you had related to the actual numbers themselves? If not, I will call your attention near the back of the report, basically behind page 41, where it goes into the compliance and internal control section of the report. I want to make note of a few things. We have our two rep letters from the auditor. First one on page 43. Just a couple of highlights I want to point out on that was that during the course of this audit, they did not identify any deficiencies in internal control that were considered to be a material weakness. Also, the results of their tests showed no instances of non-compliance or other matters that would be required to be reported under government auditing standards. And that basically has
related to the federal funds.
Yes, exactly. So the other audit report behind that mentions similar language that we comply with all material aspects of topic compliance requirements referred to. They can have a material effect on major federal programs. Also, that the results of the audit, auditing the procedures disclosed no instances of non-compliance, which would be required to be reported in accordance with the uniform guidance standards. So those are the two letters that our auditors required to put on there and basically have an opinion on. So that's good. That's good. Last but not least, page 47. Is basically the summary of auditors' results. This is an important page that kind of goes through just their opinion on the state of our finances here at ResponsiveEd. You'll notice that the auditor report issue is unmodified. Also, you'll notice that there were no material weaknesses identified. There were no sufficient or significant deficiencies identified that are not to be considered material weaknesses. And there were no instances of non-compliance material to the financial statements noted. Under the federal awards section, there were no material weaknesses identified. There were also no significant deficiencies identified that are not considered to be material weaknesses. The auditor's report is unmodified, and there were no audit findings disclosed that are not required to be reported in accordance with uniform guidance. The dollar threshold they used was $750,000. And last but not least, the very bottom one, does the auditee qualify as a low risk? That would be us, and yes, we qualify as low risk.
Can you remind me, is the 750 the same number for last year? Or was that,
No, it was 500 the year before.
the year before that? Yeah, I remember that.
I ask for high level, just audit process and timing, what it typically entails.
Well, start to finish, I mean, we're usually around 60 days. There's a lot of pre-planning that goes into the audit, a lot of back office stuff that we do before we ever get here. We usually spend anywhere from 3 to 5 days here on site with 3 staff members, doing field work, experienced staff members. I don't have, and I don't send inexperienced staff. We don't do that. Everything is managed with experienced personnel, and so that helps in the process and from an efficiency standpoint. Once we finish with field work, then there's still a lot of inner office stuff that we do before we can draft the report. We like to try to get the draft out within 30 days after field work. That's our goal. Usually can fit around. And then we submit the draft to Lori, and we go back and forth of another week of changes and tweaks and modifications. They tie out the numbers that we came up with, and by the end of that process, we've got a good solid report that we're both in agreement. Okay, so wrap it up. So it's overall we try to get that time period 60 days to 75 days overall start to finish. And, we're usually. Is that what you were asking? Yeah. Okay.
One of the things we started doing with Kurt this last couple of years, I requested was after the audit, we like to have a sit down with him and his team, not just to go through those numbers, but just for guidance. Okay, next steps of what we can do to improve. So that's kind of that ongoing relationship he's talking about. Then they come out and do some interim work later in the year to kind of get prep for the actual end of year audit. Mm-hmm. So it's an ongoing relationship.
Yeah, so that's a good point. And a lot of times, summertime, we come out and do some just preliminary work. Tends to be a little slower time for us, obviously slower time for you guys. Just do any preliminary work we can do, whether it be fixed asset auditing, looking at construction projects. I think next time we're as we talked with Cora, we're gonna do a little more focus this year on a lot of your leases. Mm-hmm. Okay, you guys have a lot of operating leases. Yeah, so we're gonna spend a little more time this next summer looking and scrutinizing your operating leases. Just and we don't do that every year, but it's time that we do that and just make sure that we're up to speed on everything, and then what we're reporting is to the dollar reporting with the documents. But we review them as a cursory every year, but a lot of times every other year or so we like to take a look. So some of that is what we're going to be doing next summer. But that helps out a lot on the preliminary side. So it gets a lot of the heavy work out. But the exit meetings after post audit exit meetings are good. And, we meet with all the staff, all the accounting staff, really interact with them and see what their concerns are, and if we have suggestions, updates. There are some accounting changes coming. Mm-hmm. Lease standards that are going to be changing soon. So
that's the leases.
Have you been auditing for us for 4 years?
5, I think.
5. Yeah. Yeah. And what other you audit other districts and charters?
Oh yes, we do. We do ISDs, a couple of very large ISDs, and a couple other small ones. We do a lot of charter schools, all spectrum of sizes, from your size to smallest small. So, and then we do several cities, water districts, things like that. We focus only on nonprofit and governmental auditing. That's all we do.
Thank you.
Sure.
Good job. We'll have lunch.
So do we just need to approve now?
Yes,
the audit? Any additional questions before we? This is a significant activity that takes place every year. Obviously, when we get something that's not modified or qualified, and certainly doesn't contain any material instances of non-compliance, it's a great thing. So again, it continues to be very solid, very strong. That's great. So,
nice job.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And it was best year so far as having data and all that to you?
Yes,
Finance?
yes. We've, as we discussed in our meeting, the time that we've been here, we've seen significant improvement in quality of data that's coming to us. And so that makes a lot of difference. That's how it's supposed to be. As auditors, we're just supposed to come in and check your numbers. We're not really supposed to be changing your numbers or doing any of that, but obviously those things come up and we do that. But we've seen significant improvement, and thanks to Corey and Ken and their help, their work, all the staff really, and staff consistent.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, do I hear a motion to approve the audit findings as of and report as of June 30th, 2018?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Second by Martin Reynolds. Does anyone object? Okay, no objections. The motion to approve the audit consolidated financial report for the 10 months ended June 30th, 2018 passed unanimously.
All right.
Great.
Kirk, thank you. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Pleasure. Thank you.
Get to wear your coat early this year.
Sure did.
Thank you, sir. Good job, guys. Thanks. All right, y'all mind if we shift back to executive report?
Of course.
We can do the 1C3 at the end if it's okay, when we stop the video. Okay, is that fine to do the executive report?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I mentioned, we're going to get it up on the screen. I mentioned last meeting, I ran through the academic accountability, but I wanted to wait till Joe was here. I was hoping Lance would be here to go back through this a little more lengthy, just to give you an understanding of how the new A-through F accountability system works and how we did this year. So would you go to I think it's the third slide. Go ahead and click those to where they fill in if you don't mind. So what you see here is, I'm gonna explain accountability real quick. It will sound confusing, and it is that confusing to people if you don't spend a lot of time on it, and that's one of the criticisms of it. If you read anything about it across the state, is it seems too convoluted for the public to understand. The hope, the desire was A through F would make sense, right? And it does, right? You give an A or an F, you get that, right? You know what that means. But as far as what goes into it, it's very so please ask questions. The colors don't mean anything. We actually had it by brand. We had PHS with red last time, and it made it red doesn't look good. It's the brand color, so we just changed it to green. But the green doesn't mean. Both TCPA and PHS, Joe, I don't know if I've told you this. We have two districts. We have two charters, right? In Texas, and then we have 4 in Arkansas. TCPA received a high B, this 86. Premier High School received an 84. Now, how is that built out? Okay, you've got Domain 1. Domain 1 is student achievement. That takes the students, there's 3 different levels of performance they can achieve for them to be passing and be able to go to, actually they don't hold you back, but at one point they would hold you back, right, in 5th and 8th grade. They don't do that, but to pass the test, right? So a parent, I have kids in school, several of you have kids in school, to appear that you pass the test, right, and then move on. That was something they held you back on. It is, there's a student that actually, it's called approaches now. That's really passing, but that's the lowest level. It's called approaching. Then there's meets, and then there's masters, right? That Domain 1 takes all 3 of those categories of performance. And so if you hit masters, you're basically getting credit. You're getting 3 points as a student, right? You hit the middle one, you're getting 2. If you approach, you're getting 1, right? Okay. Because they take all those numbers and they divide by 3. So when you see that score, when you see that 80 is You could have we'll show you some other charts where you'll see how they did in each of those 3 performance levels, but it's taking each of those and it's dividing by 3. So you could, in theory, have a lot of kids hitting approaches and just not doing very well in masters. Or you could kind of flip it and you could kind of go after just the kids that are on the bubble of getting masters, not focus so much on other kids, and it still come out with an 80 or an 86, right? I'm sorry, the 80 on domain 1. So you can see Premier, which is high school. As you look across the state, the EOC, there's 5 of them that are tested. You will see high school performance is higher across the state in general. So that 89 is from the test being given, those 5 tests in high school. So next is domain 2, the student progress, school progress. So they now this past year, they have 2 parts to it. They have part A, which is academic growth. This is you're actually looking at the student that had approaches last year. If they go to meets this year, or if they were meets last year and they go to masters, you get a point. Okay, and that goes into that figure. If you go from masters down to high meets, you don't get credit, right? Although no one in this area is sitting around thinking about the student going and taking the test. We really don't care around here. Nobody's definitely sitting there saying, hey, push your kid from high meets to masters. That's where you can see, and we see this as we analyze the data, you can see schools that are and our own schools that are in low income areas where kids struggle coming in the door from another school. You'll see those numbers a lot higher, right? Because they come in and they do a lot better. What you won't see is when you get in the suburbs, you won't see that number being so high for the very reason I just explained, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're sitting there teetering between high meets and masters, right? And again, it's not a big value at home that's saying, hey, really work harder and get masters on the test. So that's part A. The part B is relative performance. That's looking at other schools with other charters and districts with the same percentage of economically disadvantaged. So in our case, it's in the mid 40s, low 50s. They're going to look at other schools that are similar, and then they're going to say, relative to those, here's how you did. And they scale it out, and it's a 90 on TCPA. The NA on Premier, they do not have relative performance because there's not that many AEA schools, alternative accountability schools. So there is no number given to AEA schools, the NA. So I almost have to chuckle as I'm explaining this because it's just silly in a lot of ways, the way they built it. And they know that, and they keep hearing this. So they're going to tweak it again. Like I was saying earlier with Charter First, same thing's happening with accountability. They roll it out, sounds good. People start pushing back around the state, and there's tweaks to it, right? Sometimes major tweaks. So you take domain 2, you take A or B, you get A or B, whichever's higher, it goes to your overall. Okay, so go look at Premier, you see a 74, there's an NA, so you get 74 on the overall. TCPA, you see a 76, you see a 90. So why isn't it 90? Well, if you have any schools that got below 60, then you can't be an A, you can't be a 90. So you get an 89. That's why that happens. Once you do that, once you get domain 2, you take domain 2, and the greater of domain 2 or domain 1 is what they use to then continue the calculation. So in this case, TCPA, they use the 89 overall from domain 2, and on the Premier, they use the 89 from student achievement. That was the higher of, right? Once they do that, you take 70% of either the higher of domain 1 or domain 2. You take 70% of that, and then you add it to 30% coming from domain 3, and that's how you get that overall. Okay, didn't that sound simple? It's just like taking a test at school and getting an A. So closing the gaps, I'll explain that. Domain 3, closing the gaps. This is taking sub-pops, and this can be from, it can be special ed, it can be limited English proficient. It can be African American, Hispanic. There are 24 different sub-pops. Doesn't mean every school is evaluated. It's for the all 24. It's depending upon the number of kids in each of the sub-pops. So they take those, and each of those sub-pops has its own standard of what is required to basically get an A for that sub-pop. And then they take all 24 of those. So there's 12 in math, 12 in reading. They put all those together, and that's where they end up with a number, the 80 or the 73, right? There's a lot of frustration around that because you could have a sub-pop that has only 20 kids in it out of a district of 10,000 or 20,000, and that one sub-pop has just as much value as another sub-pop that has 10,000 kids in it. So they've got to get that fixed. All that negative criticism of the system, we did very well. We're very proud of where we ended up. When they released a report in January of 17 to the legislature, so nothing was official, but legislature mandated they submit them a report January of 17, so almost 2 years ago. It was really a mess across the state. Even in our own district, we were looking and running the data, and it looked like we could get D's and F's because we're such a diverse district, right? So they had some tweaks to the law that next session. Not a lot on what was mandated of the agency. They tweaked it, and then they still gave all the discretion to the agency, right? So the agency could have doubled down and said, well, we're just going to keep it very, very not only complicated, but really kind of harsh the way it's rolled out to the state. Generally, when you switch from different accountability systems, you'll see a dip, right? They want to see that dip politically because then they will turn around and they'll start showing growth, right? And it's during somebody's tenure, right? So this happens all over the country. Probably a very good thing we were in election season, right? We just had an election a couple of days ago because what they ended up rolling out was really an easier standard to achieve than what was in January of 17. That was a good thing across the state for all schools. That's not to take away anything from our staff in all these campuses working very hard to push their performance on the STAR assessment up. They did, and I'm going to show you a couple of those charts where you can see the growth from last year to this year. But our staff understand this, and they're watching the video. They'll understand everything I just said because they have the same frustration as staff that are trying to go in and teach kids, right? And it's being built so much around test scores. This is trying to move away from that. And there's some hope in that. There are things happening where it's not just the test. It's also looking at, and it's not just college ready. It's also looking at career ready. It's also looking at if a kid chooses to go into the military before they go to college and giving credit for those things called CCMR, career college military readiness. So they're giving you more credit now if you take certification. It's not just go to college, get a high SAT, ACT, which is important, but for some kids, it may be getting a welding certification. So they're giving credit. Very good, especially for our premier students. So I gave you kind of a quick overview with a little negative slant to it, but there are some positives in this. And for us as a district, there's a lot of positives. Those are very good numbers because you cannot have any schools that are IR, or in the new system, it'll be F, because you can't have those that have an A. You'll probably never see an A for any big district like ResponsiveEd, because you're going to always have struggling schools, especially if you're taking over schools that are struggling and then running those schools for a couple of years. They're going to struggle the first couple of years. So you're never going to see a Louisville ISD or a ResponsiveEd or KIPS, those kind of organizations getting an A. So this is really very good, and this is what you're going to see every year, we believe, if we continue doing what we need to do. Any questions on kind of that overview? So I have the next slide. You really can't read, but we did give you a printout. This shows you in a color-coded fashion. It shows you how did the schools themselves do. So there is not this year an A through F rating for campuses. I say this year, for last year, right? The one that just was released. So this is all you'll see on the state's website is you'll see those scores. You'll see the 86 for Texas College Prep Academy. You won't see well, you will see for the district, you'll see the B, but Amarillo Collegiate, you'll see an 86. You won't see a B. Okay. So it is in bands of 10. So 90 and up is A, 80 to 89 is B, and so on down to F. So if you glance across there, you see a lot of green, dark green. Those are A's. You see the light greens, B's. You see the light blues, the C's. You see D's that are a yellowish color, and then F's are the red. Again, they don't have an F this past year. They will have an F moving forward. The overall is what you're really going to be concerned about, because that would be an IR school. The domains, you could have the red. That's an area of concern to focus on, but if your overall is not an F, then you're not getting an IR rating, and there's no sanctions from the state. You look at the schools that, you can see the schools that did very well in the green colors. You can see the schools with C's in the light blue, and then you see the F's there on the overall column. So you see Founders Dallas, these Shirts, the virtual learning, and Beaumont. Beaumont did not get an F because of Hurricane Harvey. They had all of that part of Texas exempt from accountability because kids were out of school for a month. Some of them, like Beaumont, were out for a month. So it's actually not an F for Beaumont or any of the schools across that region. The virtual, if you've been on this board for a while, you know we've had some concerns with the vendor we were using. We have finally, that contract is ended, so we are running the school ourselves with our own staff for the first time. So you will see significant growth on the virtual side that we continued year after year to be challenged with the vendor we were using, but we were in a 5-year contract. Shirts was a shock to all of us. Shirts is a suburban school. Should have done a lot better, like the other Founders that are suburban, which got A's, B's. Once C was Mesquite, which is not a suburban school, it's more urban. So of all the other Founders, the suburbans like Shirts, you're getting A's and B's. This was a partnership with another group, and they had, you know, most of the control related to the person that was hired, the curriculum used, all those things that we've talked to that group because we're still great. They're great partners and we're still working together, but they know we're taking more of a hands-on with that group. So you will not see that. That director chose to go somewhere else and work in a private sector because they just didn't care for the state assessment, which shows with how the school itself did. Kids were still learning, but they were not focusing on the TEKS like they should have been, Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, which again is why you saw an F. Now, we have appealed. There is an appeal process that takes several months. We have appealed because the law actually says you have to, the state, TEA has to look at domain 1 or domain 2. So in domain 1, if you look at Shirts, they got a 67, which is a high D. Right, almost a C. So legally, they should have just used the D and transferred that over, and then it wouldn't have been IR, right? But the way they scripted out this system and the way they kind of doubled down on it, they said if you have an F in 3 of the 4, which Shirts had, then the overall is an F. So really point to you as a board as in governance is it's been taken care of. We have new leadership there that understands the importance of team. And then Dallas, lastly, Dallas has been merged with Mesquite. So those kids, we're proud to say about 90% of the kids at Dallas moved to Mesquite, which was only 3 miles away. So now they're on one campus. Mesquite, which both Mesquite and Dallas were turnaround schools where we took over schools from other operators that had been failing for 3 or more years. Mesquite was one of those as well. Mesquite had been an F for 2 years. We didn't use that term, but IR, and they got a C, which they did great work there. So they're overcoming some of those challenges, and it's because the school's been there for 4 years now, right? The kids have been in school 3 or 4 years with the same consistent operator. So Dallas is, we've got an agenda item Dallas has actually been closed and returned to the state, and those kids have moved over to the school. Any questions on that? Before we look at Premier. Premier is a different system. It's called an Alternative Accountability System, AEA. And you can see really you have a couple of yellows, the D's, and then you see a few F's on the far end with domain 3, but nothing in overall. Domain 3 is the only part of the Alternative Accountability System that is the same as standard accountability. So when I was telling you earlier about domain 3, sub-pops, looking at different groups, as you look at those groups, you will see a standard for, limited English proficient or special ed, or for Hispanic. Well, that standard is exactly the same, the way the system's built out for standard and for AEA. What the state says is that's a requirement from the federal government. So having the bar so much different than anything else, that's why you see those lower performing in that domain 3. Doesn't really have an impact overall at the end of the day, but just so you understand why that's happening. Even with graduation rate in law, in statute in Texas, we had a law passed 6 to 8 years ago where the state's required for an alternative school to look at continuers, because we have a lot of kids in these premiers that are 18, 19, 20. So they would be dropouts. If you looked at 4 years and you said at the end of 4 years, did they graduate? If they didn't, they're considered like a dropout, right? Well, that's not fair to a system that they're going out and finding kids that have been failed by the local district for 4 years, then we take them in. You don't ding us with the kid as a dropout, right? And that's the way it works in everything except domain 3, right? They calculate continuers, but domain 3, they don't factor that in. And again, they say it's because of the feds. So again, looking at the numbers, we're very proud and happy with what our staff achieved and accomplished this year. They all really worked hard to get where we're at, campus by campus. Let me show you a couple other things real quick. Chris can figure out how to operate it. Thank you, Chris. All right, so it's another topic on the agenda, and we've talked about this before, related to taking our models and moving them into different charters. We have 2 charters right now. We have the Premier, which has AEA, and then we have everything else in a TCPA chart. So looking at this chart here, this is just showing you different scenarios. Looking at the top, you see ResponsiveEd Denton County. So these are all the schools that are either in Denton County or schools like Coppell and Carrollton that are real close to this cluster, right? Well, looking at the cluster, you see kind of midway down, you can see a 5 up from the bottom, you see TCPA. That's currently the way it's viewed by the state. That's how it is as one charter with 13,000 kids involved. It's an 86. But then look at the top, you see how Denton County performs, and I'll show you a comparison to school districts around here. It's 94, right? You go below that, you see iSchool, that model with Amarillo, which is an iSchool as well as has K through 8. You can see they're at 94. And then third, you can see TCPA, if their economically disadvantaged numbers are less than 50%, you see it at 92. And then you can see the founders models. You can see TCPA minus virtual. That's kind of in the middle at 90. Is that 90 or 88? It's 90, right? 90. So we are looking at this. We've been looking at this for years. This is great data to show the state that says, because every year we're pushing for legislation to fix the problem that keeps us from asking for more than one charter. Now, we got 2 because we were grandfathered, but as far as getting a 3rd, right now, legally, they can't give us a 3rd. It's us going and getting another 501c3 to let us basically acquire, and that's not a term the state would use, but it's in the end, it's us controlling another 501c3 charter and then moving assets around and the models, right? But you can see the advantage to the public if they were to see the performance, because they're looking at Denton County schools. They don't want to see an 86 when it's really a 94. I'll show you that in a second. You'll see why. You go to the next slide. So this is a comparison. Next slide, I'll show you. Don't go there yet. I'm sorry. Next slide will be Denton County. This is charter operators. So you can see the Harmonies. Those are individual charters. You can see how they're doing very well. You can see Great Hearts is number 4. That's like the founders model. It's 93. You can see TCPA, which keep going to about the middle without virtual at 90. You can see IDEA, KIP, and so on. But where are we? We're down there close to 4 from the bottom, you know, with TCPA having virtual, which is the other vendor, okay? But you can see 86 isn't bad, but when you compare us to our peers, you know, it's not great either, right? It's until you start pulling away, like you pull virtual out. No one else has a virtual. You pull virtual out with their performance or lack of, you see we go up 4 points to 90, which puts us on the top end of that. Let me show you another slide. This is Denton County. Very proud of this. So you'll see ResponsiveEd at the top of the list. Argyle 95, ResponsiveEd, all the Denton County schools at 94. You see Grapevine, Louisville, and so on. So we do not have the data presented this way because we're one big charter, but we are looking, and we've been talking to you for years about this. I'll talk about it again on a separate item in a second, but you'll see the need for having 3 or 4 additional charters to break them out into models, right? So the funders can see it, the public can see it, parents can see it, the legislators can see it, and so on. All right, next slide. Real quickly, this slide shows you how we did with academics. It's the B I was showing you earlier for both districts, and then in the finance area, we got the A as superior. And then you can see how we did by campus in each of the letter grades. Okay, and again, those are not official this past year. They will be for this year. Go ahead. This shows you the distinctions. Not something we really focus a whole lot on because the way they look at distinctions is they determine as a state who they're going to compare you to. And it has nothing to do with location. It's supposed to have everything to do with the economically disadvantaged percentage. So they'll take and then they'll compare you to either 25 or 50 peers, supposedly. But we can show you the list, and the list is all over the place, the people they put on there. So it's not something we encourage our staff to look at, but at the end of the day, you know, we want to applaud them when they do hit something. And that 7 of 7 is Clay Academy, which is the first time we've ever done that, where they had 7 distinctions and they hit all of them. You know, they were better than their peers at everything else. Okay. This is Texas board meeting, of course. I did want to show you how our Arkansas schools performed. Northwest Arkansas Classical is, for this year, we're showing they were in the top 5 schools in the state. That is a founders model without the name, but the same program, top 5 school in the state. Quest Academy of West Little Rock is converting to a founders model in the next 3 years. The state of Arkansas just approved letting us move Quest Academy from its own charter under Northwest Arkansas, which will allow it to expand to K-12. Right now it is only 6-12, and it will allow them to expand to other parts of the state. The Premier is not rated, which is a good thing. Unless they would come out with an AEA system, it's good they're not rating the dropout recovery school, credit recovery schools. By the way, the state just approved in the last 2 months opening another Premier for ResponsiveEd in North Little Rock. So we're excited about that. Is there one more slide?
Yes.
There's 2 more slides real quick. This shows you how we did taking the data and overlaying it with the accountability system. So accountability A through F didn't exist in 16-17, the yellow bar, but you can see there using the same data, Premier went from a 38 to a 39. In domain 1, this is only the test, and this is you can see there it's got approaches at 72 and 71. You got meets and you got masters, and then it takes those and divides by 3, right? They did have almost 800 more. They had over 800 more tests in Premier, and still showed some growth. And then TCPA, you can see significant growth of 5 points. And then lastly, just to highlight our Thrive schools, this is a program we put in place. It's not a brand. It's called the Thrive Program Schools. But Erica Johnson Allen did an amazing job as the head of this this program. And you can see there, you can see the blue performance for 17-18 and how she did with these high-need Title I schools. All of them either in the Dallas area or down in the Houston area. Right under Clay, you got Fallbrook Academy. Fallbrook was a school that we were asked by TEA to take over after it had been closed because of 3 years of IR, improvement required. And this was our second year. So going from a 30 to a 39, we did amazing work. And then you can see Mainland Prep, third from the bottom, another turnaround school. So we're known, we're very diverse. You know, when you look at Harmony and you look at KIP and IDEA and those, they do great work with kids, but they're very singularly focused on, they do one model and do it well, right? We do one model. If we were to break them out into the chart, you'd see one model and you see how well we do when you break them out. Well, when you put everything together and you throw virtual in the middle of it, it's just good to pull the data out like this so you can see how we really are doing. Still looks good, all clustered together, but we are very diverse. We are the most diverse charter operator, not only in Texas, but the country. There's no one else out there that's running dropout recovery and then high performing college prep school. So again, great staff out there doing what they do. So that is a kind of an overview of accountability, academics, that I wanted to make sure. And one of the things you will see, one of the things you've asked for as a board is for more of this kind of information, not just talking about buildings all the time, right? And finance, which is what we were spending a lot of time on. So we'll be talking more about mission, vision. We'll be talking about more about the academics, which is why we even exist, right? So you can know how we're doing. We will be bringing in more people. Like Corey's here from finance. We'll be bringing other people in to let you just be introduced to them. The staff, we walked around today, we met some incredible people. We'll at least every 6 months, we'll have a student come in. You get to hear from a student, maybe parents, just so you kind of don't just get bogged down in all just the number stuff, which matters, obviously, but I know you want to see the passion behind it. Any questions on academics?
Great, thank you very much.
So these charts will help the schools see kind of where they're at.
Right.
It'll help them improve.
And all this is in a product called Tableau. So Tableau, they can go in and they can open these documents and they can click on it and drill down and give you a lot more information.
Can they recreate the data through Tableau, or do they only have read-only access?
Read-only.
Good answer.
Okay. So we jumped around. We're now going to get separate item number 2.
All right, separate item number 2 is consider approving the relocation and foreclosure at high school Hickory Creek.
So this, we have 2 resolutions that you have in your Dropbox on this one. And you'll see this. You open the first one there. That says Dallas. So Hickory Creek is this high school. It started at Flower Mound at Parker Square, and we moved it out. We moved it to Hickory Creek because of the demand for Founders. So we had Founders Louisville with 1,000 kids on a waiting list, and we had an opportunity to move high school out and put the Founders in Parker Square and open the Founders Flower Mound. So that's the built on Flower Mound Road. So it's tremendous success, as you know, and a lot of demand, and it has its own waiting list, and Louisville still has 1,000 on the waiting list. So if you've been around here any length of time, you know we are good at incubating things. So one of the things we incubated was high school. and then moving different models in. And when Flower Mound moves out, we're looking to move the virtual component downstairs over to Parker Square, to use that building, and then have a drop-in center there where parents can still come and actually get some academic services at Parker Square, but it just won't be a Founders anymore. So with iSchool, we moved it to Hickory Creek. It went to the building that now has overflow from Corinth Classical. So that location, iSchool Hickory Creek, has actually got 300 kids from Corinth. So we have the iSchools here. We have one at Lakeway. We have STEM over here. Those parents have slowly over time, because they've known we've been moving other models in, like Hickory Creek. We accommodated I think it was the sophomores. We said, okay, over 3 years, we're going to let you all graduate as seniors, and then we're just going to close that location, right? And you can come south of the lake. Freeway got done. Everything's more accessible. So a lot of that happened. So this number can either be returned or it can just be closed, which means we tell TEA the number it's not used anymore, right? So that's why you have 2 items on here. We need your approval on both. We're still talking through how we can use that number to relocate it. You want to add anything to that, Robert, as far as possibilities for relocating? Okay, but that's why we're asking for flexibility, and we'll decide over the next month or so. Do we just give it back to TEA, or do we come back to the board? We go ahead and tell TEA we're going to relocate it, because these numbers are pretty important. There's a timeline that you have to submit to be able to expand, and so you really don't want to hand them back if you don't have to, because you can move them around, right, within 25 times. So that's what the item is. Have any questions on that? This is all paperwork with TEA. As far as offering iSchool at Corinth, that stopped at the end of last year. And those parents, either the kids graduated or they moved down here. So if no questions, we're just asking you to approve the resolutions, and we'll have you sign those later, related to either returning or relocating iSchool.
Any questions? All right, I'll make a motion to approve consent, separate item, number 2, and approve that information that Chuck just provided. Second by Mark. Anyone object? Separate item number 2 passes unanimously.
Okay, number 3, we're asking for you to ratify. This has already happened. We've merged Dallas with Mesquite, and we're asking you to approve closure of that number. So that number is IR, so we like to return it. And as I explained in our opening about academics, that's moved and merged over, and 90% of the kids moved 3 miles over to Mesquite. Challenge with Dallas always was once we moved in there with the landlord, which is a church, they started having continuous problems with the city of Dallas. And if you're around here and you watch any of the local, you've seen the city of Dallas pushing back on charters, kind of in collaboration or collusion, if you will, with the district, right? So the Dallas moving in there had room for about 225 kids, but we were told we could put portables like we did at Mesquite. Mesquite's now over 600, and what happened is we could never get traction. And one of the issues you have in accountability is if you don't have enough kids, just by small numbers, you end up with some, right? And that's true of just analyzing all the schools across the state. You're going to have trouble if you only have 50 test days, right? Especially if you're taking and doing these turnarounds where you're taking over another school from another operator. So the big issue with Dallas, I'll let you add anything if you want, Robert, but the big issue was the city just wouldn't allow us to do anything. That's good. That's good. So again, we're asking you to ratify the merger and approve the closure of Dallas, returning it to TEA.
Any questions on that?
Hey Chuck, just for general information, why you said those numbers are valuable, so why would you turn that one back in?
Because it's IR, so they take that into, there's a calculation of being able to receive approval for expansion. You have to have 90% of your schools are met standard, D or higher. So 10% can be IR or not rated. So having one taken off the books is a positive because of the calculation.
Okay.
Good question.
Okay. Do I hear a motion to approve?
Motion to approve consent item 3, the merger and the closure as described.
I'll second that. Anyone object? Okay, great. Separate item number 3 passes unanimously as described in the merger.
All right, this number 4 is a lengthy statement here. To sum it up, here's what it is. It's you have a section of the law that was passed 8 years ago in SB 2, Senate Bill 2, that got thrown in. Just one little phrase got thrown into the bill at the very end of the negotiating for the bill, and it was a positive related to charters by charter supporters, and it says a charter holder cannot have more than one charter, right? And then allowed you to grandfather existing like us and Harmony. We have tried year after year, and we get close, but then it doesn't happen. Something happens. We've tried to get that struck where we can apply for additional charters for the reasons I described earlier. Right now, it's on the books. So the only other way we can do what we've talked about doing around moving the models into other charters is to, I would call it, for this board to understand, for general public to understand, it's basically taking over and merging with other charter operators, right? TEA does not like that term anymore, at least the people, commissioner doesn't mind it, but the people that work for him, they don't like it. That's not really an official merger. They did let us merge, because what we started with was 15 charters back in '99. We then consolidated down to 1, about 5 years in, so 15 years ago. Then 5 years later, we saw the need as we opened these. At that point, we were only running dropout recovery, credit recovery. When we started opening other models, that's when we saw the need for having 2 different charters. So we had an operator in Central Texas that merged with us. That was an official merger. That was, we went to Secretary of State, we merged 2 corporations. Right? The TA is saying, well, they're not going to allow that ever again. What this is it's asking you, and I'm going to have to come back to you to give you specifics, but it's asking you to grant me authority to negotiate with TEA and other charter holders. If you remember, we bailed out Shekinah Radiance down in San Antonio, which is now called Heritage. We bailed them out, 3 years ago? We sent people down there. We have people from ResponsiveEd that are on the board of Heritage. They have controlling board membership. That would be the first one we would start negotiating on. But what's going to have to happen is TEA is going to have to see and understand, and not the commissioner, it's everybody else, what we're trying to accomplish. And they would have to proceed and say yes, they're okay, for me to then come back to this board and explain it more to you and get more approvals. All I'm asking for today is you give me a resolution that I can go to the people at TA and say, yes, this board knows what we're trying to do. We don't have all the details worked out, of course, but at least the initial phase of going out and trying to get some kind of, do you have a better term, Chris, than merger? Just partnership? Partnerships. But as you can imagine, we're not going to partner with someone we don't have some kind of controlling interest in, and if we're going to move assets. Right? So very broad. Chris was the one that almost like, well, why do you even need it? Because you're going to have to come back. The reason I need it is because I know the people at TEA, what they're going to expect. They're going to say, they're going to want something that says, y'all heard about it, right? That we've talked about.
Only question is CMO. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that acronym.
Charter, good question. Charter Management Organization.
Okay.
And for-profits are called EMOs, Education Management Organizations. CMOs are almost always referred to for nonprofits. The CMO. Okay. So, do you have any questions on that?
No questions.
Okay. Oh, great. So, okay, somebody have a motion to approve consent item number 4.
I move.
I'm sorry, separate item number 4. I keep wanting to call them consent item.
I so move.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Second. Thank you. And, anyone object? No objection. Great. Separate item number 4 passes unanimously. As Bill Belichick would say, we're on to number 5.
Really?
You would say deflate football.
Oh. Wow.
Must be a Cowboys. I mean, I get it. It's been
No.
100 years since you last won. I understand.
You do know my annual election, I know. You're
This is the next item, right?
I've done my job.
You brought up Bill Belichick. Why would you not?
Coach, what,
Yeah,
what would you
not?
do with the
Yes.
football? He never touches footballs.
Indirectly.
I could bring up the goat for that.
He's got a long reach.
But you know, like they had the little competition. They were reporting it as the battle of the goats, and you know Brady won, so he must therefore be the goat. Which, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's the greatest of all time.
You want to move to annual elections and board office?
We're moving on to number 5.
Okay, so this is just an annual requirement in our bylaws to have board officer election. So right now, Joe, you may already know this, Ben, I'm going to probably get it wrong. Ben is chair, vice chair, and
Secretary.
secretary. So we have 3 officers. So,
Vice president. We can come up with vice chair.
you want to change anything or just leave it the way it is? You can make motion.
Well, clearly, my affiliation, my sports team, World Series champions, Super Bowl champions, those things. Clearly, I mean, might offend folks. So if you want to vote me out, I'll just have to bring it up with the, TDA and other.
I definitely believe you're doing a fantastic job. I'd hate to see anyone else in that chair. Because of your knowledge and your availability.
Thank you.
So can we just do a slate and kind of leave it the way it is?
Yeah.
You have a question? I'm sorry.
No. I'd say it's just, do you move or how does the process resolve itself?
Make a motion.
All right, I motion to re-elect the board officers as they are in place today.
Okay, I'll second.
You want a third just to,
Just
Conflict of interest.
does anyone object to that? Other than Lance, who's abstaining. But we'll elect him to come back.
Okay.
No objections. Number 5, separate item number 5, and the election of the board officers remains as approved unanimously.
Okay. So we're going to go into closed session
Of the charters.
of the charters.
So we're going to
Can
adjourn
we
this
do that?
meeting.
We're in the
Oh, we're in the
charter.
charters now. We're not in
So
the
we're going to go
bylaws.
into closed session. Are we going to closed session?
Yes, let's go into closed session.
Do you have documents?
You should
Something
have
to
your
read?
Yeah, sorry, my bad.
signatures.
Yep. All right, we're going into closed session. And you gave me the one
Yes.
particular one. Okay, pursuant to section 551.7074 of the Texas Government Code, we are authorized to go into closed session. No votes will be taken until we convene in open session. Ready? You're recording. Sorry.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to open back to open session. It's 1:28 in the afternoon, Friday, November 9th. We are out of closed session. There will be no votes taken at this time, and the meeting is adjourned.
Okay.